Hello, welcome back to Bus Stops. Today we are going to be talking about another picture at a bus stop. Let's spin the wheel and decide a picture to talk about. Today we are going to talk about this photo. This photo is of a church, obviously not a functioning church, rather a church building to be more precise. This was a photo that was taken by a tilt shift lens, perspective control lens, if you prefer. By the way, I changed my mouse to a larger mouse, so it's a little bit easier to see what I'm referring to when I point to something. But it's nice too because it'll go away if I just sort of leave it. And I do like to just talk about the entire photo sometimes. So if you hate the mouse, let me know in the comments. Anyway, this photo is a church building in the south side of Richmond. And it was taken with a perspective control lens, a tilt shift lens. And in this particular image, I am employing that tilt shift capability. And that is, if you're unfamiliar with the technical terms of photography, a tilt shift lens is pretty cool. It doesn't really have a good analog, a good equivalent in iPhone photography. So there's ways to fake the effect. If you've ever seen typically a photo of like a city from a high up perspective where everything kind of looks miniaturized, it's the same effect, and there are ways to fake that. But this is the actual optical tilt shift effect happening. And typically, or rather the way that these lenses work is the front element of the lens, or the front grouping of elements. The actual lenses are made up of multiple pieces of glass, typically 5 to 15, I think, is the usual amount for most lenses. If I had to just kind of pull a number out of the air, you can please don't quote me on that. If you are curious, actually look it up. But in any case, a tilt shift lens takes at least the front grouping of elements, or at least the front lens itself, and can actually skew. It's actually with a tilt shift lens, it actually might be the entire body of the lens, every piece of glass. I'm not totally sure, but this comes from like a large format camera. If you think about the cameras where they throw the cloak over their heads to look at the glass, in that case, the front lens board can actually move basically entirely independently of the ground glass and the film plane. It's a little bit harder to do that with a 35 millimeter film camera, or now just a DSLR camera that we know. And actually, mirrorless cameras now. People don't really even use DSLRs much anymore. But they're still tilt shift lenses, even in the brave new world of mirrorless cameras. Now, the way that these lenses work, like I said, the front element of the camera can move independently of the main body. The front element of the lens can move independently of the film sensor, the imaging sensor. And one of the things that this effect can accomplish, one of the effects that this method accomplishes is the skewing of the focal plane. And so in this image, you see the example of the top half of the image being largely out of focus, and then the lower half being crispy and sharp. You can see here that the sharpest part of this image is kind of this brick corner. And actually, interestingly, you can begin to see this effect where this brick is sharp, and then this concrete here is sharp. And actually, there's kind of regions of unsharpness between them, where actually the sharpness seems to kind of pass in a line. And it would be easier to show you this if I had my hands, but you'll just have to conceptualize it a little bit. You can even see the sharpness sort of traveling back along this brick here. And so if you imagine a typical lens, the sharpness, when you focus in a lens, you're moving that glass in very small increments relative to the imaging plane, and that creates sharpness at a distance radiating away from the image sensor. But that's kind of I suppose it's a flat plane. might be a sort of a distance related thing where it almost sort of travels in an arc, a radiating arc based on the focal distance of the lens, kind of like the view angle of the lens. But it might be a plane. I've never really totally tested that. But with a tilt shift, when you actually tilt the front element forward or backwards, the plane of focus skews at the same angle of the front element of the lens. So part of what I wanted to achieve with this photo was that bizarre effect where actually this tiny bit of window back here, the very deep pockets of this image are sharp. You see the sharpness of that piece of brick back there. You see the sharpness a little bit sharper of kind of the outside area of that window. And then so there's a line of sharpness that kind of moves, is laid flat essentially, or laid down away from the camera, whereas the actual top parts of the image become blurred, severely blurred even. And so even though this wall is on one plane relative to the imaging sensor, the plane of sharpness is, or plane of being in focus, nonetheless sort of skews relative to this pipe. You can see this pipe is actually a great case study of this effect, because despite being on a vertical wall, you see it is sharp here, and then it just becomes progressively more out of focus as we travel up, which is completely unusual for a lens where the focal plane is fixed in the same parallel arrangement to the imaging sensor. Now that this has mostly been a discussion of tilt shift lenses, and I've largely not talked about the content of this image. I thought you might find that discussion of tilt shift lenses interesting if you're not familiar with it before. In any case, yeah, this image has a lot going on. It is a largely abandoned church building. It says no trespassing, or no passing, no spassing on the door. We kind of lose some of the letter there, but nonetheless, it's easy to imagine what the rest of that handwritten sign says. And then Ieve, most of believe there above the church door. But nonetheless, there is light radiating from the right side of the frame. And then you see kind of the open windows of a structure that clearly lacks a roof in the back of the building. You can actually see here in the brick where floor joists would have been at one point, and then the actual blue sky out to the top of the building. You see the brick ends there, and then the roof is absent from the back part of that building, whereas we nonetheless see not only windows but a door, and then actually just green foliage behind this building. And so I intended this image to be somewhat haunting, somewhat mysterious. Despite the fact that I was standing on a sidewalk, of course I was standing at a bus stop when I took this picture, like every picture in this series. Yet nonetheless, despite being exterior, I think that this image contains a lot of interiority. How I think the tilt shift sort of causes the image to fold in on itself in some capacity. The top parts of the image where we would see the sky kind of become blurred and smeared, and we are in largely the shadow side of this image, and yet nonetheless there is still present plenty of light. That is one of my, I guess if I had to kind of like boil my photographic practice, the types of photos I'm inclined to take down into like a single histogram, it would be something that has very skewed to the left, very skewed to the shadow side, and yet nonetheless with like piercing bits of light in it, and sort of the understanding that the light is there if you look for it. So in this image, again, a lot of shadow, a lot of actually kind of skews even into total pitch black on the left side, and yet nonetheless there is sharpness, there is light, if we nonetheless look for it in some capacity. I will leave the more philosophical interpretation of the photo up to the viewer. There's a lot of times where This is a photo that I would have to wrestle with in a lot of ways, and a photo that I wouldn't necessarily put forward as a statement of belief, yeah, as it were. There are other photos that I may talk about more conceptually and more precisely, I guess, in the philosophical underpinnings of it. But yeah, this is a photo that first struck me visually, but I don't always trust the things that just strike me visually. There are many things that I don't make photos of, and but nonetheless, sometimes if I think there could be a resonance, or if I think I could find a way to talk about it, I go for it there. But an abandoned church has its own intellectual and philosophical baggage, but that's a much longer discussion that we may get into at a future date. But nonetheless, I give it to you to consider this image. I'll have to come up with a good name for this picture. Usually as I talk about the picture, the name sort of comes to me, but no Spassing is the one that comes to mind at first blush. Maybe I'll stick with that. It's kind of fun. Spassing is a fun word to say. But I'll give it a think. You'll see the title of it before too long. So thank you for listening to me talk about my picture at a bus stop.